Crossing is not necessarily a good thing, it can also be a trap. Zhang Cheng suddenly discovered that he had traveled to an incredible magical world. At the end of the Western Zhou Dynasty, Canrong invaded and King You of Zhou was killed. Behind the turmoil in this world is the intense conflict between the gods. And at a higher level, a plain war is brewing between the two worlds. As cannon fodder, amidst the chaos, he wants to find his own path. This is the story of a traveling mage. Friends who like can add groups 1015165118 keywords of the novel. Minecraft War of the Traveling Mage without pop-ups. Download the complete TXT collection of Minecraft War of the Traveling Mage, and read the latest chapters of Minecraft War of the Traveling Mage. Chapter 1. Sudden Wedge Death. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Sudden Wedge Death. In modern society, we often hear a word called sudden death. The original meaning of this word can be simply understood as very sudden death. In fact, the vast majority of deaths are very sudden. For example, being killed by a sword, being shot to death by gunfire, being hit by falling objects from high altitude, drowning in a river, being run over by a vehicle in a traffic accident, and so on. Although there are many such situations where unfortunate people can drag on for a while, these unfortunate accidents, or external forces, are fully capable of killing a normal human in an extremely short period of time, such as a few minutes or even seconds. However, these modes of death are not within the scope of the concept of sudden death. Because although it causes death in a short period of time, these causes of death are all obvious. The concept of sudden death, in addition to being very sudden, has another element, which is the unknown cause. Or it can be understood that sudden death refers to sudden death without knowing the cause. This is particularly evident in ancient times. From the perspective of modern people, whether it is a myocardial infarction, cerebral hemorrhage, or other diseases with long incubation periods but intense attacks, they can all kill a person in a short period of time. And for ancient people, these diseases were completely incomprehensible to their pathogenesis. So, the deaths caused by these diseases were referred to as sudden death by ancient people, which can be fully understood. Due to the advancement of medical knowledge, the assistance of various modern instruments, and even the killer weapon of autopsy, modern people have been able to further understand these severe diseases. Sudden death is no longer a death of unknown cause. We know that a well-known type of sudden death, myocardial infarction, originates from unhealthy lifestyle, dietary habits, and certain genetic influences, causing the accumulation of congestive substances in blood vessels, gradually narrowing the coronary arteries in the human body. When this narrowing reaches a certain degree, it will block the blood vessels, causing insufficient blood supply to the heart and ultimately leading to myocardial necrosis. Without the heart, human blood circulation is interrupted, and then the person dies. This is the process of disease gradually accumulating and eventually erupting in daily life. That is to say, although the ultimate onset of the disease is to cause death in a short period of time, in reality, the disease is a long-term accumulation process, and patients are already under the threat of the disease. Rome was not frozen in a day. The accumulation of this disease will eventually erupt. So, the term sudden death has gradually become sudden death due to illness in modern times. But is it really like this? According to incomplete statistics, approximately 1/10 of the deceased who are classified as sudden death cannot find the cause. Alternatively, autopsy can reveal the direct cause of death, such as cardiac arrest, cerebral hemorrhage, etc. However, we have no idea what caused cardiac arrest or cerebral hemorrhage. These sudden outbreaks of diseases are not the result of long-term accumulation. Some sudden deaths have always been healthy and have not experienced high-intensity exercise, let alone external injuries. The entire body seems to have no reason for death, but one of their key organs has malfunctioned, leading to death. The medical explanation for this is always ambiguous, and doctors can easily give reasons such as excessive fatigue, genetic defects, and emotional ups and downs. Or simply say, currently, medicine cannot explain. No one knows what happened to them. What exactly did they experience before their death? Perhaps no one cares except for family members and doctors, or even family members and doctors. Has anyone ever thought about why they died? Is it because their bodies have accumulated harmful factors that cannot be explained by science for a long time, and then suddenly erupted one day, like a myocardial infarction? Or have they experienced something that ordinary people cannot imagine? End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Sudden Crossing. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Sudden Crossing. Zhang Cheng closed his eyes for the last time and then opened them. Nothing has changed. At this moment, he was standing in an empty wilderness, with a verdant grassland under his feet. The tender green grass was sprouting vigorously, and the sky was clear and clear, with warm eyes shining on him. The sky is very blue, the clouds are very white, and the air is very fresh. A gentle breeze blew by, gently caressing his body and face. Everything was so peaceful and beautiful, allowing people to stay away from the hustle and bustle of the metropolis and come into contact with the purest nature. This is not an ordinary suburb. An ordinary urbanite often has a similar experience, accompanying their family and children, or simply inviting a group of unknown netizens to hold an outing or picnic together, and taking a car to a nearby and remote wilderness to enjoy a few days of wild fun. But although these suburbs are green everywhere, in reality, due to their proximity to the city, the air quality is not particularly good. That's why some hikers are full of adventurous spirit and carry their luggage into the true wilderness. In that wilderness, one can truly see what blue sky, white clouds, and fresh air are. The first reaction of urban dolls entering those places is to exclaim, "How could the sky be so blue?" This is what nature calls. In short, the environment is beautiful, and the only problem is that Zhang Cheng is very clear that he shouldn't be here. He is not a hiker and has not gone on an outing. In fact, it's even worse than this. If he remembers correctly, just now, or before he came to his senses, he should have been playing computer games in the house he rented. Specifically, at this moment, he should be sitting in front of his beloved computer in an ordinary apartment building located in XX Community, Dongzhou City, China, in the rented house, facing the computer screen, playing games with the keyboard and mouse in one hand. But now, he stands alone on this grassland. Although the plants are lush, the terrain here is an uneven hilly area filled with gravel. Not to mention keyboards, mice, and monitors, even reinforced concrete cannot be seen everywhere. Zhang Cheng had to spend enough time convincing himself that everything was not a dream. If it's not a dream, then there's only one explanation, which means he has traveled through time. As a Chinese born under the red flag and raised in the new era, after more than a decade of atheistic education, he is naturally a materialist. To be honest, it's better to admit that you've traveled than to admit that you're crazy. But the only reason left in his mind told him that even if he went crazy, there was no reason to be so crazy that even the world environment had changed, right? This is not Saya's song. He has no understanding of what exactly happened. What's going on? Just now, there seemed to be a feeling of drowsiness, but why did this strange thing suddenly happen? How did he come to such a place? What kind of world is this? How did he travel through it? Why do we travel through time? Unbelievable. No, this is no longer unbelievable, but contrary to common sense. By the way, think about it carefully. What exactly happened today? What exactly caused my journey? Is it because I have a special talent? Zhang Cheng quickly felt that this was unlikely. Yes, Zhang Cheng is an ordinary person. Ordinary background, ordinary family, ordinary appearance, average academic performance during student years, ordinary schools. In other words, it is not much different from 99% of people in China. He himself doesn't believe in his exceptional talent and ability to travel. So, what happened to me today? Today was very ordinary. I spent half a day at work, had an argument with an old jerk, and then sneaked out in the afternoon to attend an interview for another company. That's right, like many unlucky people, Zhang Cheng met a jerky boss as soon as he entered the workplace, and now his mind is full of finding another offer to change jobs. But if this is obviously not a reason for crossing over. If we can also cross the country like this, then at least the population of China is definitely not 1.4 billion. Returning from the interview site to the residence was also calm. Nothing happened all the way. I didn't find anything that looked like an antique, let alone the common adventure in movies like suddenly encountering a stranger and rushing over to thrust a mysterious package into his arms. In fact, nothing happened and I calmly returned to my residence. Back home, start playing computer games as usual. Wait, computer games. Computer games. By the way, that's it, computer games. If I remember correctly, Zhang Cheng is convinced that he traveled through time while playing computer games. According to some popular belief, there are actually no so-called ordinary people in this world. That is to say, people who appear ordinary actually possess extraordinary talents and talents in a certain aspect. The reason why it looks ordinary is because its talent has never been discovered throughout its life. If someone asked Zhang Cheng what his talent was, he would probably answer, playing computer games. It's not that kind of online game with competitive consciousness and hand speed, but a single-player role-playing game. In this regard, he has excellent talent, and can even be said to have an almost sixth sense intuition. Besides this talent, he also has a second advantage, which is that he really enjoys playing computer games. Whether it's loneliness, fatigue, or high stress, sitting next to a computer and opening a game can immediately calm him down, temporarily freeing him from the various distractions of real life during a gaming journey. This is a kind of relaxation for him. So naturally, he became the god of a single-player game forum. He wrote several guides that almost uncovered all the hidden storylines of the game, and of course, there were various speculative methods to pass the game, so strong that it made people doubt whether they had read the game's source code. He was highly praised by a group of players who needed guides to pass the game. To be fair, this can also be considered a skill. Although this skill is not very useful in this world. Before crossing over, Zhang Cheng was playing an unnamed computer game. This is because of his status as a forum god. Some people hope he can write a guide for this game. This is an unknown fantasy game, which means it is a role-playing game that adventure in the world of swords and magic. Perhaps some people may find it strange to be unknown, but the fact is that it is. Of course, it's not that the game creator forgot to give their game a name, but rather, the relevant text displayed in the game is garbled. This is obviously because the language used in the game is a minor language. As is well known, if the language of the computer system is different, the character set used for data transmission will also be different, resulting in the situation of using the sword of the previous dynasty to slay the officials of the current dynasty, which is commonly known as garbled code. Not to mention different languages, even different characters within the same language, such as simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, are prone to such conflicts. So the other party wants to try out the strategy with a great spirit. But in role-playing games, if you can't understand the text and can't have the correct conversation with NPCs, that's just a joke. Of course, Zhang Cheng lacks superpowers and the ability to recognize garbled characters. But he has a trick in his hand. He has an intelligent translation and transcoding software. The development company was unlucky, the software was not yet completed, and the funding chain broke and went bankrupt first. The person who took over the company completely rejected the value of this software, so the semi-finished product was left unattended and no one cared about it when it flowed out. After all, this thing is a semi-finished product, claiming to be smart, but it is really just a claim. I have definitely thought too much about using it for translation, and sometimes it's a breeze. As a commercial paid software, it will definitely be sprayed out by users. But besides being free, it also has an advantage, which is that it combines very well with the game. It can greatly solve the problem of garbled characters. With its help, about 80.9% of the content of this unknown game can be converted into Chinese. Although it has the style of the Japanese Concord language, yours, 8th root, work, at least it can be barely understood. If you can understand it, then you can start basic communication with NPCs and continue the game. Of course, for some other things, such as proprietary terms, this software doesn't know how to translate and occasionally adds garbled code to the game, reminding players that they have made language mistakes. This game was sent over by that netizen. Well, where does it come from and who made it? The other party hesitated and talked about it. Zhang Cheng didn't pursue it either. After all, it's just a game and not a dangerous item. What's there to delve into? The other party only wants a strategy. And he also got a new experience. This is not the first time for Zhang Cheng, who is a forum expert. Since becoming a god on the forum, people often send private messages inviting him to complete a certain game. Some are publicly released games, while others are unheard of. It is estimated that a beta version was created by the production team of a certain studio to seek opinions. Of course, it is also a win-win situation for him, as he can play some games for free that others cannot access. However, upon closer examination, it seems that this game has nothing to do with time travel. If playing a game can travel through time, then there will definitely be no group of players on Earth. And this game is not his first time playing it. In fact, he has already completed it several times. This is the last clearance in the plan, and after this clearance, he will start writing a guide. Wait. It seems a bit different. When starting the game this time, the translation software suddenly took a break, and the game name was no longer garbled, but changed to Canrong. But after all, this intelligent translation software is a semi-finished product, and taking a breath is the norm, often with astonishing actions. Sometimes the translation is very accurate, even stunning, and sometimes it's like a pile of dog poop. So even if this kind of change is abnormal, it is still reasonable. After much thought, there was no clue at all. It seems that this journey is inexplicable and inexplicable. Zhang Cheng could only walk towards the tallest hill ahead. Although I don't know exactly what's going on, at least figure out where this is. Or at least find someone to ask. Standing on the top of the small hill and looking down, Zhang Chengchi couldn't help but let out a subconscious curse. I'm crazy. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Real World 1. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3 Real World 1. Standing tall, one can easily see the large stone ahead. This is a stone half buried in the soil, exposed to the outside, and from the perspective of Zhang Cheng, it looks like an ugly face. It's not a big deal, there are many strange stones in the world, and nothing is surprising. But the problem is that Zhang Cheng knows this stone. That's right, he has seen this stone before. Not in reality, but on the monitor screen. In the game of Canyon, when a new game starts, the character you have created will walk all the way from outside the screen to the edge of this stone. Or rather, this is the starting scene of the game. This stone has a very unique shape, probably due to the rise of art, which left a very deep impression on Zhang Cheng. Although Zhang Cheng tried his best to restrain himself from daydreaming rationally, the moment he saw this stone, an uncontrollable thought came to his mind. Did I cross into the game? No, this is impossible. Even if the game has a bug, it's impossible. Nonsense, if a game has a bug and can traverse, then computer games are definitely more dangerous than weapons. Such dangerous things must be strictly controlled by the state and not accessible to non-professionals. Even if there are any bugs in computer games, when it comes to the sky, at most it's just a crash, right? Many years ago, there was an incident where a virus burned down the motherboard, and that virus caused a huge uproar. And computer games, not to mention time travel, can make the computer overheat is a true miracle. Looking up, there is a cloudy sky above my head. At this moment, the sun is hidden behind the clouds, but the sunlight still gilds the edges of the clouds. The gentle breeze was brushing against the earth, and waves of wind swept across his face. The shrubs and weeds growing in the crevices of the rocks are gently dancing in the wind, making a rustling sound. In the air, there is a unique scent of fresh grass and trees. And in the soil, Zhang Cheng can see small insects lurking in the soil. Zhang Cheng lowered his head to look at himself. He remembered very clearly that he was probably wearing a shirt on his upper body, jeans on his lower body, slippers on his feet, and by the way, socks. He probably hadn't had time to take off his socks yet. But now, he saw himself wearing some kind of fabric he had never seen before, and his upper body was just fine. Even if the clothing style was a bit strange, it would never change. If we were to describe it, this should be called a short skirt. The lower part of the body feels chilly, and the so-called wind blowing egg cold is this feeling. You don't need to touch it to know that there isn't much underwear or anything like it. Also, he didn't wear anything under his feet. Yes, he stepped barefoot on the rough ground, but didn't feel any discomfort. And these feet are not his feet at all, but a pair of feet covered in mud with thick calluses on the soles. Modern urbanites, wearing comfortable shoes, never have the opportunity to grow such thick calluses. Except for women wearing high heels. There is a small puddle next to it, not sure if it is due to rainwater accumulation or groundwater infiltration. It is shallow, but still relatively clear. Zhang Cheng leaned over cautiously and saw his face reflected in the water. This is not the face he has seen countless times in the mirror or in the photo. This face is full of childishness, looking around 15 to 20 years old, about the level of a high school student, with a face full of shock and confusion. The facial features of this face are average, not necessarily good-looking, but also not unattractive. Thrown into the group of high school students, it is probably a very ordinary and inconspicuous type. Wait, where is this when evaluating the appearance of this face? Zhang Cheng quickly touched his face while watching the reflection in the water perform the same action. He is certain that this is not him. This is not his face, this body is not his body. So, is this a soul piercing? Or am I completely insane? But soul piercing seems to have memories of the original owner. He doesn't seem to have any strange memories. In order to test if his memory was really disrupted, he tried to memorize the multiplication table and the periodic table once. Then he also recalled the outline of the report that the old bastard wanted him to write today. He hadn't written it yet, secretly went out for an interview, and he planned to write it casually tomorrow to cope with it. Of course, in the end, I forcefully pinched my thigh. If anything else could be fake, the clear and direct pain transmitted from the thighs would definitely not be fake. So, my memory is completely fine. Zhang Cheng was satisfied. I don't have any memory disorders, nor have I gone crazy. The environment around me is real, and I really just traveled through time. Well, a soul piercing. But it seems like this is even worse. Time travel, really time travel. And where exactly is this place? Is it really in the game? Looking at the unfamiliar face reflected in the water, and then looking at the big rock in the distance that resembles a human face, the answer seems self-evident. Canrong. He murmured the name. He crossed into the game. And it's the place where the game starts. But is the gaming world or something unbelievable? Or rather, this is simply a violation of logic. Zhang Cheng knows that games are software created using computer programming. Simply put, it is a program that is a complex software created by the hands of programmers. What you see on the computer doesn't really exist, it's all fake. All scenes, characters, or similar things seen on the screen are essentially woven together by zeros and ones. And here. Here gently touch your unfamiliar face with your hand, and a clear touch emanates from both your hands and face. This face doesn't seem fake. Or is everything, including my current body, fake? He remembers very clearly that at the beginning of the entire game, it was when the protagonist walked up to the big rock with a human face. Then, the opening screen ends, the game begins, and the characters can be operated. Players can control characters to perform various actions through the mouse and keyboard. But this cannot explain why I am here. He carefully recalled the past events, but couldn't recall what he had done. Apart from creating a character and suddenly starting the game without entering a name, there seems to be nothing else to do. Wait, by the way, I have created a new character. He still remembers the attributes of the characters very clearly, such as Strength 9, Agility 10, Physique 12, Willpower 14, Intelligence 16, Charm 10, Luck 8. These are acceptable attributes that can be used as a mage. Then he lowered his head to look at his slightly thin body. Although he felt very healthy and full of strength all over his body, it was evident from his physique that his physical fitness was slightly lacking. In the game, 10 is the value of an ordinary person, and it is reasonable to judge the strength of this body as 9. Is this the effect of Power 9? And Charm 10, because I have seen my reflection in the water before, and this appearance is really average without any surprises. So, he suddenly remembered, could you take a look at his character's attribute panel? You should know that in the game, players can call up relevant panels at any time. But, do you have a keyboard or a mouse here? How do you do it? But when he thought about it, his heart suddenly moved. An inexplicable idea came to mind. Then close your eyes and say, panel, in a voice that you can only hear yourself. Sure enough, the character panel suddenly jumped in front of me. Closing your eyes should have been a darkness, and this panel inexplicably hovers in the center of this darkness, feeling no different from playing games against a monitor. The first one is the character attribute bar, which still includes numbers such as Strength 9, Agility 10, Physical Fitness 12, Willpower 14, Intelligence 16, Charm 10, and Lucky 8, none of which have changed. The status of the character next to it shows Normal. The character ability bar on the panel also displays the identity, bloodline, profession, specialty, and talent bars, just like the previous character creation. Having no bloodline, he is an ordinary human. In his identity column, he carefully selected and prepared 3 specialties and 1 talent, Common Language Mastery, Multilingual Mastery, and Text Mastery. The only talent is Rebirth, a talent that can help characters recover health relatively quickly. Choosing these 3 specialties is to open up as many tasks as possible for the character. But unlike when creating characters, the panel also has a final tab interface, which is the task log. The tasks received by the characters, as well as experience level upgrades, are all in this interface. Of course, you don't have to look to know that this interface is currently empty. No experience, no task. Zhang Cheng tried back and forth several times to confirm that it was easy to summon the panel. Of course, he is just a game enthusiast, not a novel enthusiast, so he didn't know that the system was a standard feature for the trailer. Therefore, when you see that you have this interface, not only do you not feel lucky, but you also feel even more anxious. He finally accepted that he had traveled, but was he actually traveling to a real world? Or did he travel into the game? These two concepts are completely different. The former means that he has come to an unfamiliar world. At least now the scientific community has clearly proposed the hypothesis of a parallel world, which is still a barely logical thing. But if it's him crossing into the game, it's completely incomprehensible. What's going on when a normal human living in the material world is suddenly thrown into the computer data world? That may make people doubt its matrix or brain in a vat, or even doubt the existence of the self. But what's wrong with this panel? This is completely unscientific, okay. But now, looking up at the sky, there seems to be no one in the sky who can control his hand or mouse or anything like that. If we look back, there seems to be no problem. Zhang Cheng turned around and walked in the opposite direction. Ahead is a vast wilderness, with no invisible walls blocking him, let alone any other restrictions. You can run, jump, accelerate and decelerate freely, and even bend down to pull out a weed on the ground. Well, the grass covered in soil can be easily twisted and thrown away. You can even chew the grass in your mouth and taste the sour taste. After running and jumping, you can still feel the tension and swelling of the muscles, which means you will be tired. Additionally, I began to feel a slight thirst. This is really a world, not a game. Should it be? At least I am currently free and not controlled by any unknown force. Should I change direction and not approach that face stone? This idea suddenly came to Zhang Cheng's mind. But a few minutes later, he immediately realized that he had no choice at all. Because he has nothing on him. Yes, he has no water, no food, and no luggage. Nothing but personal clothing. I don't even have shoes. However, this can be ignored. His feet have quite thick calluses, which means even walking barefoot is not uncomfortable. Although he has never practiced survival in the wilderness, living in an information age, Zhang Cheng at least understands that it is impossible to survive in the wilderness. Not to mention people like him, even Mr. Bei needs to carry a knife with him. If there is no food, a person can probably persist for 3 to 5 days. But without water, how long can a person last? Don't talk about the water in these puddles. These waters may look clean, but they only look clean. In fact, bacteria are growing inside and cannot be consumed at all. Drinking this water is highly likely to cause a series of symptoms such as diarrhea. You should know that if you are in the city, diarrhea is not considered a disease at all. Drink some salt and water, take a break, and you will be fine. Even if it's more serious, it's just taking some medicine. At best, go to the hospital or clinic to get some water. But in the wilderness, without medication, even ordinary diarrhea can lead to death. In the field of vision, there is nothing resembling a human settlement. Anyone can easily infer that their current self, or the person being transported, is clearly not going on a normal outing. He has cleared the game several times. And the first scene of the game is the refugee camp. As mentioned earlier, although there are garbled characters, it is not possible to fully understand the world background. But it is also easy to understand that war breaks out in the plot, and the protagonist is one of the fleeing refugees. My own path should be the direction of escape. What will happen if you turn back and walk that way now? This doesn't seem to require much intelligence to guess. Also, as long as you walk to the edge of the human face stone, you can probably determine whether this is a real and not imaginary material world, or a computer game. Zhang Cheng's attempts wasted a lot of time on the road back and forth, but in the end, he returned to his previous small hill. As mentioned earlier, you can see that large stone with a human face right here. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Real World 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Real World 2 Zhang Cheng began to carefully consider his own situation. Firstly, this should not be China, let alone Earth. From the stone that resembles a human face and the various details of its own body, it is speculated that this is either a game called Canyon, although it is an unreliable result of intelligent translation software, let's temporarily name it this way, or an otherworldly world that can be called the Canyon world. Secondly, he has no idea how he actually crossed over, so there are no clues to return to Earth. Then, there was nothing on oneself except for clothes. Although his body has changed, he is certain that he is still flesh and blood, suffering from pain, injury, and bleeding. A small cut was made while pulling out the grass just now. Although he only feels a slight thirst now, I believe he will also be hungry and thirsty. Touching one's own body, one can feel the 5 internal organs inside. Having no possessions, the wilderness is desolate, and turning around is a dead end. So the only option is to go back the way and go to the first scene of the game, which is the refugee camp. But what would happen if I walked forward and reached the edge of that stone? Zhang Cheng couldn't help but ponder. Will an unknown mysterious force suddenly appear and control me, operating like a puppet? Just like a player controlling their own character. You know, he has done the same thing countless times. In fact, all RPG games are like this. As a player, it is natural to manipulate the characters created by oneself in the game, and one cannot feel inappropriate or guilty about it. But now that he has become the created character, he instinctively resists becoming a puppet. Although the materialist worldview made him realize that this should be a real world rather than a game. But who made it clear? After all, the unscientific and materialistic thing of time travel has actually happened to him. Shouldn't it be? This is a real world. And besides, since I've traveled, no one plays games in front of the computer now, right? He comforted himself in his heart. After all, this is a single-player game. But who said that the me at this moment is Zhang Cheng? I could also be a cloned consciousness. The real Zhang Cheng, perhaps right now in front of the computer screen, patiently watching the game read a note, waiting for the game to start. In short, although I know I should go to the edge of the stone, I still hesitate in my heart and cannot make up my mind. You should know that if this is really a game and he is a character in the game, then walking over will completely control oneself, with no more freedom. Think about it, some invisible force controls your every move, allowing you to be manipulated and controlled like a puppet. Just thinking about this possibility makes one's hair stand on end. It should be said that this outcome is probably only slightly better than death. Even in the eyes of some people, this is more terrifying than death. He stood there, struggling inwardly, unsure of what to do. Then, suddenly, he heard a beastly roar. Zhang Cheng's whole body involuntarily trembled, and the fear from unknown sources suddenly seized his soul. All he could do was turn his head slowly, mechanically, with a wooden and mechanical motion. Not far from the slanted thorn, he saw the terrifying beast. In the first moment, his gaze was taken away by the other person's amber eyes. That is a pair of chaotic, beastly, greedy eyes belonging to the hungry and thirsty beasts. In modern society, people also have the opportunity to come into contact with wild animals in the reinforced concrete jungle. No matter what city, there are always one or two zoos. Moreover, due to the railings and glass, people can calmly and carefully examine the wild animals up close in an absolutely safe environment. However, it should be pointed out that although those wild beasts can still be called wild and difficult to tame, they are actually in long-term contact with humans and have become accustomed to their existence. On the other hand, they have reliable guarantees for 3 meals a day. The zoo cannot let them go hungry. Although they are beasts, they are not thirsty beasts. There have been incidents where tourists accidentally entered Lion-Tiger Mountain and were bitten to death by a tiger. However, if a tiger bites a person, it is not so much about wanting to eat them as it is simply out of hunting instinct. So when the tourist accidentally entered, he was not attacked at the first time, but was bitten to death when he revealed his vulnerability, that is, exposing his back to the tiger. These artificially captive wild animals have already distinguished themselves from real wild animals in the wilderness. So this is definitely the first time Zhang Cheng has seen such eyes. His instinct, as an animal's intuition when facing danger, may have been worn out in the peaceful reinforced concrete jungle in the past years, but at this moment, it has been polished again, and he is crazily shouting in his mind, making him understand what kind of danger it is at this moment. My throat is dry, my body is numb, and all that remains in my mind is an inexplicable thought. Canyon is a fantasy adventure game of swords and magic. In this game, players have to face many dangers, go through many battles, dry blood on their bodies time and time again, and repeatedly put one foot in the coffin. This is a dangerous, wild, and chaotic world. In this game, even a genius player like him has gone through countless experiences of saving before the war and reading after being defeated. He has watched scenes like, victory and defeat are common things in military families, great hero, please start over again, too many times. So, is my first battle coming? The vast majority of such games do not start with a bunch of monsters directly attacking. Or rather, all such storyline RPG games are very similar in this regard. Firstly, they are all teaching levels. If not, there is at least a storyline similar to teaching levels. Introduce the story background and teach players how to operate characters, such as actions, battles, transactions, unboxing, and other basic operations. This is the prologue of the game. Canrong is no exception. At the beginning of the game, the character created by the player will come to the edge of the big rock with a face, and then mutter to themselves a big conversation, probably about the destruction of war and running alone here. It is estimated that they have temporarily escaped danger, so they need to rest here and so on. Then players can follow the character's prompts and walk around in a circle, doing simple tasks such as digging soil pits and tree holes, thus mastering the basic operations of the game. After everything is completed, the battle will begin. A disabled jackal will appear next to the stone. Yes, when the mouse hovers over the other person, you can see their name called, Disabled Jackal. Considering this is a teaching level, it seems normal for the boss to be a disabled jackal. This battle is very simple. The teaching level is very challenging and limited. Experienced players like Zhang Cheng can easily understand the combat methods by looking at both sides. Because at this moment, the protagonist is unarmed and without armor, while the image of the jackal is the opposite, with armor and weapons. Even if you think with your toes, you know that the game won't make you charge up bare-handed against the boss against A. Even if you haven't noticed the issues with these character designs, at least you can see that the other person's name is Disabled Jackal Man, and seeing the word disabled, you can estimate that they will never leave. And after all, it's a teaching level, so the appearance time of this boss is always very standard. The player must complete the previous series of tasks, such as walking in all directions, digging a hole, and other small tasks, before they can appear. No more than a second, no less than a second, faithfully fulfilling my responsibilities as a boss in teaching. If it's a game, that's exactly what it should be. But if it were the real world, the situation would be completely different. For example, if you hesitate in place and refuse to reach the human face stone, the boss will be unable to bear it and rush over without waiting for those tasks to end. On the computer monitor screen, watching a boss rushing out next to the protagonist is one thing, and experiencing firsthand watching a roaring jackal rushing in front of it is another thing. The former allows you to control characters with a mouse and keyboard to prepare for battle with peace of mind, and there can never be any state of being caught off guard or having a strong mental impact that produces a deterrent effect. The latter, like Zhang Cheng at this moment, was so frightened that he immediately panicked. Yes, if we want to describe it, we can roughly say that Zhang Cheng has already been taken away by fear at this moment, or to put it bluntly, frightened. In fact, when I first saw the jackal, there were still more than 10 steps between the two sides. That is to say, there is a time of 3 or 4 seconds. If it were normal circumstances, a person would have had enough time to take many actions, at least to turn around and run away. But now Zhang Cheng's performance, to put it in the right adjective, is simply dumbfounded. Completely standing still, watching the other person charging towards him, completely wasting these precious seconds. In fact, he had long anticipated the existence of this boss. There's nothing he can do, he's been playing the dog army game all this time. And this is the opening boss. I may not remember other monsters and battles, but I cannot forget teaching bosses. But on the computer screen, it's just a blurry animated icon, the visuals of the game canyon are not very detailed, and it's impossible to evoke any fear. You know there is such an enemy, but you really don't know what this enemy looks like in reality. At this moment, in front of Zhang Cheng was an upright beast that was still half a head taller than him, even with its back arched and legs bent. The spine of this creature is not as upright as that of humans. On the contrary, when it reaches the shoulder position, it appears to be hanging downwards, making its spine always arched. Its head is vastly different from that of humans, with a head similar to that of canines, but in proportion to its body, it is much larger than that of canines. On the protruding kiss of the dog's head, there was a wide open mouth, and yellow saliva flowed through the white fangs, even dripping down the chin. Its eyes are filled with greed, but it does indeed have a radiance belonging to intelligent beings, and it is full of cruelty and madness. This beast is wrapped in a seemingly tattered armor made of a mixture of leather and metal. Although it is in a state of disrepair, at least it also wraps around vital areas such as its chest and abdomen. The exposed part is covered with thick and hard hair. Whether it's hair or armor, they all look dirty, stained with some greasy and disgusting dirt, whether it's minced meat or something else. Although separated by a few steps, one can still smell the stench emanating from the other person. The most important thing is its hand, which holds a meteor hammer. There is no room for discussion or communication in this battle, and the opponent's killing intent is simply overflowing. It seized the opportunity when Zhang Cheng was so frightened by the sudden change that he couldn't move and rushed forward directly. At that moment, the jackal and werewolf had already rushed over. It stomped heavily on the ground with its twisted feet, and every step sounded like a big drum hitting Zhang Cheng's heart. He wanted to move, but his body was stiff like a stone. After countless generations of evolution, the human race has developed many excellent characteristics, but also gave birth to some instinctual reactions that can only be said to be very bad. For example, the state in front of him is the worst instinctive stress response. Fear is like an invisible rope, tightly binding his limbs, making him unable to move, making him unable to make the right move, and can only watch helplessly as the other person rushes past the final safe distance, waving the deadly weapon in their hand. The jackal raised his meteor hammer and struck Zhang Cheng head-on. To be honest, I'm lucky. Because although the meteor hammer has various advantages such as high power, simple use, strong armor breaking ability, low maintenance difficulty, and relatively low power consumption, it also has several huge drawbacks, one of which is the slow speed of the weapon. Those who have used this weapon know that there is a clear time interval between the arm holding the meteor hammer exerting force and the meteor hammer hitting the opponent. If the jackal and werewolf had a spear in their hand, it is estimated that Zhang Chengji's reaction was not enough to play it out directly, and he became one of the most shameful examples of a group of time travelers who died on time. But after all, the speed of the meteor hammer is slow. At the moment when the opponent waved his hand, death was already close to his skin, and he could even feel the heavy breath of death spraying on his neck. The shackles of fear finally loosened. Zhang Cheng's body has regained its ability to move, but although his body can move, his mind is still blank and can only rely on instinctive actions. Subconsciously, the only thing he did was scream and stumble backwards. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Real World 3. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Real World 3 Objectively speaking, this is not a matter of personal ability and psychological quality, but rather the transition is too rapid. You should know that less than a few minutes ago, he was still a white-collar worker living in a reinforced concrete city, living a normal life. Urban life and bloodshed are completely different worlds. For Zhang Cheng, the so-called battle is a battle of wits and courage against a bad boss, as well as the numerous difficulties he faces in searching for new jobs. Although these things are difficult, they absolutely do not involve life or death. In fact, for ordinary civilians, the kind of battles that can cause bloodshed and death all happen on television or computer screens. Zhang Cheng was still thinking about whether he would be controlled by an unknown force as a puppet, and how could he expect a killing opportunity to arrive without warning. How could I have imagined that my behavior in the face of danger would be so unbearable? Not to mention fighting, I couldn't even escape. If Zhang Cheng is given a chance to complain, he will probably scold the other party. Why don't you have any public morality about boss? I haven't reached my spot yet, why did you come out? You won't receive any bonus even if you appear early. The meteor hammer fell into the sky and almost brushed against Zhang Cheng's nose. The strong gust of wind hit his nose firmly, suffocating him. As long as he retreated a few centimeters earlier, this meteor hammer will hit him. If hit head-on, the fragile human skull will be directly smashed. If it's a brush-through hit, it can also pull his entire facial belt and facial features off his face. The meteor hammer hit him heavily on the ground in front of him, splattering soil everywhere. This evasion has nothing to do with anything else, it's just a matter of luck. Originating from an irresistible instinct, he continued this retreat. It must be said that if this is the ground of a reinforced concrete jungle, then at least the ground is flat and there won't be too many obstacles. It doesn't matter if you take many steps back. But this is wilderness. As is well known, even if the wilderness is flat, in fact, from a closer look, it cannot be flat. Not to mention all kinds of obstacles such as grass, trees, vines, gravel, and soil blocks, there is no shortage of smaller ups and downs. Zhang Cheng stepped on a protruding object with his heel, whether it was a piece of soil, a stone, or a plant, but in an instant, his body lost balance. Sitting backwards on the ground. A common buttocks landing posture. Instinctively holding hands on the ground, exposing the entire fragile head and chest completely, facing the deadly danger ahead without any defense. This posture is so dangerous that even those who cannot fight can understand that at this moment, Zhang Cheng has completely lost his ability to defend and avoid. As long as the other party tries again at this moment, Zhang Chengji will definitely be hit. It's hard to say how much damage he will cause, but it's certain that this move won't fail. He is really lucky. If this is a knife, sword, or even an axe, or any other such cold weapon, then if one strike fails, the other strike can immediately catch up. Warriors with enough strength and skills can even change their moves midway and directly attack the opponent's vital points after failing. With Zhang Cheng sitting on the ground like this, it's impossible to dodge the second blow. But this time, Zhang Cheng has to face the meteor hammer. Meteor hammer is a different matter. Its power is indeed immense. Just now, this blow fell to the ground, causing the ground to tremble, and even the soles of human feet can feel that amazing impact force. If this hit just now, not to mention the flesh and blood of a human body, even an iron body can be smashed into soft cotton with this blow. However, if the jackal wanted to swing the meteor hammer back up and launch a new attack with this weapon, it took 2 or 3 seconds. These 2 or 3 seconds determined Zhang Cheng's fate. Before the next blow arrived, he shouted and turned over, using his hands and feet to get up in time, then turned around and ran. He had forgotten how long he had been running, only feeling the sound of wind blowing past his ears. After his mind finally cleared up a bit, he turned around to take a look. The jackal roared and chased towards him, but at this moment, there was a huge distance between the two sides that was enough for people to think calmly. The imminent crisis of life and death has moved a little further away, and the brain can finally think normally. Zhang Cheng finally remembered that he was a disabled jackal. After all, it's a boss in teaching, how strong can it be? In the game, the character created by the player is now unarmed, and has just completed several easy tasks aimed at helping players learn how to operate. This werewolf is equipped with complete weapons and armor, although they are all very rudimentary. That is to say, in the game, at this point, the normal situation is for players who have just learned, only understood, not even familiar, let alone how to operate, control characters with extremely weak combat power, and do not even have combat professions, to fight against such a fully armed boss. You don't have to ask. There are only 2 possibilities for this plot. One is that this jackal is something you can't defeat at all, and this battle is bound to be defeated. However, there will be plot kills that help you win. For example, suddenly a hero jumps out and lowers the boss to save you. Another type is that this boss has some significant drawback. You can easily win by adopting the right tactics. And the dog roam game is the latter. Although the jackal man is fully armed, his feet are disabled. That is to say, if it takes 3 or 5 steps within a short distance, it may be able to barely keep up with Zhang Cheng's speed. But if the distance is slightly longer, its weaknesses are very obvious. At this moment, Zhang Cheng had already run over another small hill on the side, and the jackal and wolf man had not even reached 1/3 of the downhill path. The limping forward speed, compared to Zhang Cheng's speed, is like a turtle versus a rabbit. It's completely impossible to catch up, there's no need to be afraid. Even if the other party is waving a terrifying weapon in their hand, it's the same. Zhang Cheng calmed down and came to his senses. Speaking of fear, it is actually a very wonderful thing. Just now, he was scared by the sudden appearance of a jackal, and he was so ugly that he made all the mistakes a person could make, almost hanging up. But now that he understood that the other party could not pose a threat to him, the fear he had just experienced instantly turned into a strong sense of shame and anger. The so called old shame turns into anger, probably refers to this situation. Although this disabled jackal is seen for the first time in reality, he has cleaned up many times in the game. So he knows very well what he should do. He quickly glanced at the ground. That's right, after all, this is a wilderness, with gravel everywhere. He quickly picked up the stone. The jackal man came limping all the way after him. Meat, fresh and delicious meat, it shouted in a vague tone. It's strange to say that even though the jackal and werewolf are handling unfamiliar language, I don't know why they can understand it in their ears. This guy is not just disabled. After calming down, Zhang Cheng had enough spare time to examine the other person, so he could clearly see the condition of the jackal's feet. The disabled foot of the jackal man was wrapped in a dirty bandage. This is not an old wound, but a very fresh one, and black blood stains can still be clearly seen on the bandage. This guy, despite his tall stature and fully armed, was injured and disabled, and on the other hand, he was very weak. He clearly had complications due to his injuries and did not receive a good diet. Besides, perhaps due to the aftermath of injury or fever or other reasons, it looks a bit disoriented. Because if it were an animal with a clear mind, it would definitely not continue to chase so foolishly at this moment. After all, the speed difference between the two sides is too significant, and it is completely impossible for the jackal man to catch up with Zhang Cheng at this speed, which is a waste of energy. Of course, for Zhang Cheng, the perseverance of the jackal and wolf man is a good thing. The jackal approached, about 20 steps apart, and Zhang Chengji forcefully threw a stone out of his hand. The stone slammed fiercely onto the chest armor of the jackal, making a muffled sound that seemed to have no effect at all. In reality, there is no visible change, but Zhang Cheng estimated that if it were in the game, he would probably see a prompt like, "You hit the opponent," causing 0 damage. But it doesn't matter. Zhang Cheng is very clear that the boss's health is only a meager 12 points. Due to the presence of armor, most normal attacks are ineffective, meaning 0 damage. But the speed of this product cannot threaten himself at all, and on the other hand, the stones around him are endless and he can afford it. And if the stone is thrown over and critically hits, it can deal 4 points of damage. That is to say, with 3 or 4 critical hits, this guy will die. Of course, as for what a critical strike is. Hitting this guy's head, preferably in the eye, probably a critical strike, right? Flying stones may not be fatal in one strike, but damage can accumulate. As long as the speed of the jackal man's movement is so different from Zhang Cheng's, there is no second possibility for this kind of battle. With this unwavering confidence, Zhang Cheng forcefully threw the second stone. This time, the stone hit the jackal's head and made a loud noise that could be heard from afar. The effect of this move is very obvious, and the body of the jackal, which was originally able to maintain balance, began to shake. Zhang Cheng took the opportunity to slightly widen the distance, then Without hesitation. Threw another stone, and then more. This is a must-win battle. With the dull sound of the last stone hitting the skull, the wolf-man's stumbled footsteps finally couldn't stop. It fell down and lay face down on the ground, with several wounds on its head covered in blood, staining its hair red. The meteor hammer in its hand also fell to the ground. Zhang Cheng approached cautiously. This is not a game. In the game, you can see the opponent's health value, and it is clear at a glance whether the enemy is truly dead or pretending to be dead. But it's not that easy now. Even though this jackal is disabled and mentally ill, he is still more than a circle larger than him. Even if there is a hand-to-hand battle at this moment, Zhang Cheng doesn't think he can win. Not to mention anything else, if that mouth full of fangs were bitten, it would be both fatal and seriously injured. He carefully observed for a period of time, and finally picked up the meteor hammer from the side of the jackal. It was heavy, but still barely usable. Then he swung it round and threw it hard at the dog's head. A muffled sound of broken bones. Under the meteor hammer, the opponent's entire back of the head collapsed. However, perhaps the other party's fur was particularly tough, so although the bones were shattered, there was no scene of brain burst. This way, it should be dead to death, right? Although jackals and werewolves are creatures that do not exist on Earth, they should always be mammals, and the brains of all mammals are weak. The entire skull was smashed and there was no reason not to die. Zhang Cheng breathed a sigh of relief and realized that the rest of his body was sore. Especially for the hand that throws stones, due to intense exercise, the entire arm is so tired that it almost cannot be lifted up. He gasped for breath and dropped the heavy meteor hammer. Sitting on the ground in one gulp. The dead jackal lay still on the ground in front of him, his body completely immobile, without even a slight twitch. This is a completely non-existent creature on Earth, and to describe it, it can be simply understood as a mixture of humans and wolves, dogs. In fact, considering the stripes on the fur and the shape of the head, one would feel that this product is more like a hybrid of hyenas and humans. Now, it can be seen that its body size is actually very large, far stronger than Zhang Cheng. If it weren't for the foot injury and disability of this guy, then I'm afraid Zhang Cheng would have died this time. And in fact, it's not just a disability on the foot, the wound on this guy's foot has deteriorated very seriously, with pus flowing and gangrene, and a foul odor spreading all over his body. It is estimated that Zhang Cheng will not appear, and he will not be able to survive for too long. This can probably explain why this guy is so foolish and only knows how to chase after him relentlessly, probably because his mind is not clear. It is normal for such injuries to cause high fever and the like. Zhang Cheng came to his senses and realized that he had already stood on the edge of the stone in front of the human face at some point. No wonder it's the first time he's faced such a battle, and his whole body and mind are not fully engaged enough. There's no leisure time to care about the surrounding location and environment. And this situation basically shattered Zhang Cheng's idea of crossing into the game. If it is a game, the Jackal Man will not appear until the prerequisite tasks are completed. After all, if a player doesn't even know how to control the character, and suddenly a boss that can instantly kill the player in hand-to-hand combat emerges, how can this be played? However, if it is the real world, then werewolves may emerge at any time. So, this is definitely not a game, so, should we understand it this way, even though this is a real world, the Canine Army game I play has some kind of wonderful connection with this world. Also, if this is a computer game, then werewolves can emerge out of thin air. But if it is the real material world, then the Jackal Man is never out of thin air. A lone wolf like this must have a source. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Real World 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Real World 4 Zhang Cheng circled around the human face stone and observed it carefully. Quickly, he discovered a pit on the other side of the human face stone, which was filled with dry grass, branches, and broken fur, forming a small nest. The foul smell was the same as that of the jackals. That is to say, the jackals used to hide here. This location is quite hidden, and if it weren't for the odor as a guide, it would really be undetectable for a while. So, jackals do not appear out of thin air. It should have been hidden here before. If Zhang Cheng arrived at the human face stone as soon as possible, instead of observing and verifying it back and forth, that is, according to the game situation, he would wander around here and spend about half an hour to an hour. After completing that series of easy tasks, the Jackal Man would appear. This is not arranged by any game system, but the injury on the Jackal's leg. It is highly likely that it was previously in a state of weakness, high fever, and coma. So even if Zhang Cheng came to the stone at the first time, it wouldn't come out immediately. But it has to wait for a little longer before it wakes up from its coma and crawls out of its hiding place to launch an attack on it. Basically, it can be confirmed that one has truly traveled to a real world rather than a game. Zhang Cheng told himself. There is no system that controls everything, everything follows the logic of the world. This is a material world. But why did you inexplicably cross over? Although I don't know what happened, I can only assume it was some kind of coincidence. However, even if this is a real world, there is clearly a very close connection between it and the canyon game. He looked up and looked around. After all, this game has been cleared multiple times recently, and he still remembers many details. As mentioned earlier, the opening of the game consists of several easy teaching tasks aimed at familiarizing players with the operation. When it comes to walking around, it's okay to move from one position to another. But there are a few tasks that come with rewards. On a low tree next to it, there is a bird's nest. How many bird eggs can be found in the bird's nest? For survival in the wild, bird eggs are very good food, clean, nutritious, and resistant to storage. They can not only satisfy hunger but also quench thirst. As expected, he easily pulled out a nest of eggs from the bird's nest. I don't know what kind of bird egg this is, but it's quite good. It's bigger than a pigeon egg and smaller than an egg. There are a total of 6, and if you save a little, it will be enough for 2 meals. There is also water. There is a small dirt pit next to it, which looks damp and completely different from the surrounding color. According to the tasks in the game, just dig a small hole here with your hands and you can find clean water. In the game, you need to right-click on this position with your mouse and select Try Digging from the action menu. Your character will go to that position and make an action that seems to be digging with a shovel. Then the game prompts you to dig out drinking water. But in reality, this requires you to find a properly shaped stone tablet before digging a hole on the ground. Finally, the first batch of mud and water that seeps out of the pit must be cleaned up before clean water can be obtained. Of course, there is one last thing. On the body of the killed jackal, there were already insects flying back and forth in the strong smell of blood. He picked up the meteor hammer from the side of the jackal. A very rough weapon, the hammer of this thing is not even made of iron, but rather stone. Or, to put it another way, after a whole stone has been slightly polished, a hole is pierced in the middle, and something that is unknown whether it is fiber or metal wire is used to make such a weapon. Of course, the meteor hammer is a weapon that doesn't really care about raw materials. Although it is made of stone, there is no problem swinging it to hit people. In the game, jackals do not have any equipment on their bodies. That is to say, killing this boss means you cannot pick up anything from it. But in the real world, it seems different. Although the process was a bit cumbersome, Zhang Cheng managed to smoothly remove the opponent's armor from the body of the jackal. That is a very crude armor made of a mixture of leather and thin metal sheets. For Zhang Cheng, not only does it not fit well at all, but the stench on it really covers his nose. But no matter what, as long as you think, there is no problem taking it away. In fact, if he had some basic tools such as scissors, perhaps he could also transform them into armor that he could use. Based on these details, it can be confirmed that there is a connection between this place and the game. Whether it is the human face stone, bird's nest, groundwater, or even the jackals themselves, it indicates that this world is closely related to the game. But at the same time, there is indeed a vast world that can move freely, weapons and armor that can be peeled off from the bodies of jackals, and jackals that have not emerged in advance according to game settings. Zhang Cheng summoned the panel once again. Unlike just now, the only difference is that there is an additional fatigue status prompt next to it. Focusing your attention on this state, you will see relevant explanatory text appearing below the panel, which reads, "You have experienced a fierce battle, or a fierce exercise, or a long journey, and now feel slightly tired. Taking a break is the best choice." Of course, even if you don't take a break, it will not have a significant impact on your actions. If he remembers correctly, fatigue will escalate to fatigue, high fatigue, or severe fatigue. The strength in fatigue state is reduced by 1, the agility in high fatigue state is reduced by 1, and the strength and agility in severe fatigue state are reduced by half. This state does not require treatment, it can be restored with just rest. Of course, in the game, if the level has increased and the money has increased, you can also drink potions to solve it. Indeed, whether it's killing the jackal or digging a pit, it's quite laborious, and it seems normal to achieve this state. Then, he casually clicked on the interface of the last task log. In the originally empty experience slot, there are already 25 additional experience points. This is the experience of killing the jackal and werewolf. From this perspective, it doesn't seem like the material world that Zhang Cheng understood. There is absolutely no such thing as experience points on Earth. But the taskbar. If it's a game, the taskbar is clear. You will receive several walk-around tasks when you walk to the edge of the face stone. But in reality, there is clearly no inexplicable presence to post such tasks to you. So at this point, both the taskbar and the completed tasks column are empty, just like before. Wait, it's different. In the taskbar, there are actually tasks. This is really not Zhang Cheng's fault. The background of the taskbar in the game is dark, and the text inside is white, which is clear at a glance, and will definitely not make you read it wrong. But now the text in the summon taskbar is dark red. A color very close to the background of the taskbar. If you look at it roughly, you really can't notice it all at once. There are 2 tasks in total. The name of a task is Survival, and the note is very simple, just 3 words, survive. Another task is called Exploration, and the note is also very simple, finding the truth of the world. In the game of Canyon, each task is marked with a task reward, which usually has 2 types. Experience points and items or monetary rewards. If it is a continuous task, the reward is next task prompt except for the last step. And these 2 tasks, first of all, have never been seen in the game, second of all, the font color is different from the game, and finally, their rewards are very strange. The reward for the survival task is an Arabic numeral 1, while the reward for the exploration task is marked with a bunch of question marks. It's quite suspicious, but currently there's no clue. Even if you want to break your head, you can't think of anything and can only temporarily put it on hold. If we follow the game process and kill the boss, the teaching level will end. Then players can leave this mini-map and move on to the next map, or in other words, to the first act of the game. Looking at the garbage armor peeled off from the jackal man and the meteor hammer made of stone, Zhang Cheng suddenly understood why there were no loot on the jackal man in the game. Both of these things were obviously very unsuitable for him. As mentioned earlier, this armor is not only rudimentary but also not fitting well. If it is forcefully worn on the body, it not only lacks defensive strength, but also can drag down one's actions. And it's full of dirt and parasites, so if you get any disease from it, you'll be at a great loss. But the meteor hammer is really too heavy. Zhang Cheng estimated that this thing is about 1/10 of his own weight. It's not a problem to wave it with force, and it's not a problem to walk a short distance, but when it comes to walking long distances, it's really too hard. It is estimated that fatigue will soon be upgraded to fatigue. Anyway, it's something very inappropriate. By the way, you can't expect to find any suitable spoils of war on such a disabled jackal. Or rather, it does not carry any property with it. But that doesn't mean it has no property. There is a small hole next to the jackal man's nest. In the game, you can pick up a pile of garbage and debris in a small hole. Yes, the name of the item in the game is a pile of garbage and miscellaneous items, which can be carried, but cannot be sold for money. A normal player would probably just casually throw it into the wild. But Zhang Cheng knew that if the character's intelligence reached 18 and they had a erudite talent, you could search through this pile of garbage and find a magic ring and a broken weapon. The former is a very useful thing in the early stages, and can be used 3 times a day for free with rainbow spray. The latter can be exchanged for money. Like the vast majority of such games, the upfront money of Canyon games is very valuable. Of course, he currently lacks both 18% intelligence and a talent for being knowledgeable. But games are games, reality is reality. In the game, if the prerequisite task is not completed, the werewolf boss will not appear, but in reality, it will directly appear. Finding that pit is not difficult, and jackals have never been a race good at hiding things. It probably threw all the clutter around here. So the things found in the pit are really chaotic, can be called garbage piles. There are too many of them, such as small pieces of fur, a bone, fragments of pottery and porcelain, or fabrics covered in bloodstains and stains. However, despite having a clear purpose, Zhang Cheng still found the target. The magic ring was actually pure black, inconspicuous, and mixed in a pile of ceramic fragments. If it weren't for knowing beforehand that there was a ring here, even in front of me, I would probably mistake it for a worthless black ceramic fragment. It is easier to find weapons, but it takes some effort to distinguish that they are actually made of metal. However, this weapon is quite peculiar. In the game, it is only said that this is a broken weapon, while in reality, what he sees is a strange and familiar thing. How to put it, Zhang Cheng is also someone who has attended 9-year compulsory education and studied history. So he could tell at a glance that this was a unique weapon in the history of China, gu. Or more specifically, a dagger without a handle. Gu is a weapon that primarily uses stabbing and pecking as its primary means of killing. Especially the long-handled spear, it is very suitable for use on tanks. In the history of China, this kind of thing once dominated the historical trend for a long time. Of course, in addition to the long spear, there are also melee short spears. As melee weapons, they can be simply understood as lightweight battle axes. The advantage is that it is easy to use, does not require special skills, maintains strong killing power while being relatively light in weight. The disadvantage is that the attack method is too single, lacking the ability of the battle axe to rely on weight to penetrate armor. The handle of this spear weapon has fallen off, with only the head mixed in a pile of broken bones, and it is covered in dried flesh and blood marks. But after washing it clean, it can still be seen that this spear is actually intact and even sharp. That is to say, if there is a suitable wooden handle, it can be immediately used as a weapon. Of course, if it's not possible, it's not heavy to carry around and can be exchanged for some money to spend. Wooden handle. Zhang Cheng looked at the few trees next to him. After all, it is wilderness. Although the environment is obviously not suitable for large-scale tree growth, there are still a few sparse trees that are not lacking. However, it is evident that cutting down trees and shaping them appropriately requires both tools and skills. He doesn't have either of these. But I inexplicably feel that I can't give up. After all, everyone knows that there is a huge price difference between a semi-finished product and a finished product. This has been the case since primitive society, and industrial society remains unchanged. Zhang Cheng looked around, then his gaze fixed on the meteor hammer that he had thrown to the ground. As mentioned earlier, this is a very rough stone weapon, although its power is not small, it really has no value in itself. Obviously, it is impossible to sell it for money. However, it has a complete wooden handle. Zhang Cheng untied the wooden handle from the meteor hammer. Although this wooden handle hangs on the meteor hammer, it is smooth and doesn't look like it was made by a werewolf at all. This can be seen from the armor on its body, which is extremely rough and rudimentary. On the contrary, it is more similar to how a werewolf snatched it from somewhere else and pieced it together to become such a meteor hammer. Fortunately, the two things were smoothly inserted together. That means Zhang Cheng has an extra short spear in his hand. In this way, he had some food, a weapon, and a magic ring in his hand. It also solves the problem of thirst. It can be said that everything that can be obtained from the teaching level has already been obtained. After all, this is a teaching level, so many things are already amazing. But can we only say that human desires are endless? Zhang Cheng thinks there is still something in this pile of garbage. End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Real World 5. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7 Real World 5 Having 18 intelligences and extensive expertise can lead to finding two good things, but is there really only two good things? What if you have 20 intelligences and other expertise related to appraisal? Although Zhang Cheng has not tried it before, after all, it's difficult to get an IQ of 20 at the beginning, he instinctively feels that he can definitely find something else. According to the standards of the game, players do not have enough intelligence and knowledge, and they would not have gained much. But games are games, reality is reality, he has enough patience and a vision from a civilized world. Over and over again, it can even be said that after carefully filtering every hair, he found a slightly suspicious new thing, a piece of wood. The material of the wood chips themselves is not suspicious, after all, wood is everywhere. Even if it's processed a bit, that's all. But this piece of wood is cut too neatly. It has the size of a playing card, uniform thickness, tough texture, and a surface that has undergone meticulous treatment without any burrs. The entire shape is not so much a handmade product of a primitive society, but more like a product of industrial society. The kind made by machines. Of course, this is just a piece of wood, with nothing on the surface. Zhang Cheng can only say that he intuitively felt that this thing seemed unusual, but he couldn't say more. He can only temporarily put it on his body now. Anyway, this thing is just so big, it doesn't weigh or take up space. The plot of the prelude has come to an end. As mentioned earlier, the road back is too dangerous, and it is very likely that it is a war zone. Now, he is facing a choice of three directions. In the game, he must and can only go from one road to the next scene's map. But this is a real world, so he can still choose. Do you want to leave your familiar game storyline and go to another map that you completely don't understand? This option was almost immediately abandoned. Since he has traveled through the world and initially believes that it is a real world, he cannot give up the advantage of his information. Move in the direction guided by the game, knowing that he knows very well what he will encounter and what he can get. Going to other places would be completely different. This is the real world, you'll die if you're killed, it's not just about reading a disc casually. But he really can't wave, and his existence is not qualified to wave. Hurry up to the first scene map, no matter what, first get yourself a profession. In the game, the process of moving forward is without any prompts, just click on the big map and you will directly reach the location of the next scene. But in reality, this road is really quite long. And it's not that boring and lengthy. Because Zhang Cheng quickly saw some traces of war on the roadside. Specifically, he discovered several broken carriages. It is obvious that a small-scale battle occurred in this area, with 3 broken axles of carriages on the ground. Not the common 4-wheeled freight cars on Earth, even if you haven't seen them in reality, at least in movies or photos, but 2-wheeled tanks without carriages. Zhang Cheng has seen it in a certain educational film. Several war horse corpses lay by the side of the carriage. The bodies of horses have ropes and shafts attached, but there is no saddle. It is obvious that these are chariots and horses, not mounts. In addition to broken cars and dead horses, there are also many bodies of jackals and werewolves. It is difficult to count how many jackals and werewolves there are at the moment, but even at a rough glance, it can be seen that there are always 20 or 30 of them. Almost all jackals have no heads. From the traces, it can be seen that the person driving the tank is not a werewolf. There are certain intelligent creatures that ride chariots and engage in battle with jackals here. Although there are broken tanks and dead horses on the battlefield, the bodies of other creatures besides the jackals and werewolves cannot be seen. So it's clear at a glance who won and who lost in this battle. Now, Zhang Cheng is a bit lucky that he didn't take the armor of the jackal man with him. More than half of the dead jackals in front of us are wearing that kind of crude armor. Obviously, this thing is not considered a trophy at all, and the winner doesn't even pay attention to this kind of thing. Judging from the degree of decay of the bodies, these bodies have been around for at least 2 to 3 days. All of this is not seen in the game. This means that perhaps the previous jackal man survived this kind of battle, or perhaps he was simply an injured deserter. Due to being too old, the meat of the dead horse has rotted severely, and some parts have grown maggots. So these dead horse meat are clearly inedible. In fact, Zhang Cheng came all the way and didn't find anything to eat. In the game, when starting from the teaching level, one usually carries a few bird eggs with them. But by the beginning of the first act, the bird's egg had disappeared. Of course, apart from that, there is nothing special about the characters, such as fatigue, hunger, and thirst. If there is a close connection between the game of Canyon and the real world, it means that the protagonist arrived at the location of the first act and almost ate the bird's egg. From this point, it can be roughly judged that the distance from the teaching stage to the first act is about 6 hours, which is about 40 kilometers away, at least not too far away. Because in Zhang Cheng's experience, a longer journey and a state of fatigue are inevitable. But it must be said that although Zhang Cheng knew he had to go to the location of the first act, and it could even be said that it was his only choice, he still felt uncertain in his heart. Completely bottomless. He has now confirmed and accepted the fact of his soul piercing. The problem is that he has no memory of inheriting the original owner at all. Not to mention anything else, he doesn't even know the name of the original owner, let alone family and friends. At this moment, even if the original owner's parents appeared, he did not know them. That is to say, his identity as a traveler is easily exposed. What are the consequences of being exposed? Zhang Cheng doesn't want to consider it, nor dare he. Moreover, he is also extremely ignorant about this world. This is also due to language conflicts between the game itself and Chinese. After all, his translation transcoding software has limited functionality and incomplete translation, especially for things like world backgrounds and proprietary terms, which cannot be translated at all. That is to say, although he has a rough grasp of the plot, he only has a rough grasp of the game's plot, and has very little understanding of the world outside the game's scope. What exactly happened in this world? Where did war arise? What exactly is the original owner of his body? He doesn't know anything about these. If you're playing games, it's completely fine. The world background doesn't affect your ability to pass, so it doesn't matter if you don't know. But in the real world, the situation is completely different. If the response is not correct, will those NPCs become suspicious? Also, what exactly is going on in this world? So many jackals. Their bodies are also human. Is it that humans are at war with jackals? What other identities do you have, such as the emperor, feudal lords, and officials at the beginning of the new game? Basic character attributes are set, one of which is the character's identity. In the past, it used to be garbled code, and one could only judge the status based on the purchase points of these identities. However, this time when Zhang Cheng opened a new game, the translation software actually translated the identities, which were the emperor, feudal lords, doctors, sergeants, corporals, wanderers, commoners, and slaves. Previously, Zhang Cheng thought it was the result of the translation and transcoding software being caught off guard, but now that he has gone through time travel, he doesn't think so anymore. No matter how I think about it, I think this matter is very suspicious. However, no matter what, the profit advantage brought by this game cannot be given up. As pointed out in his taskbar, in order to survive and become a powerhouse in this world, there is no doubt that one must fully utilize the guidance of the canyon game. There must be a way for the car to reach the front of the mountain. Anyway, go take a look first. 50 kilometers is not much on Earth. Sitting in the car, the driver stepped on the gas and arrived in less than an hour. But switching to walking on two legs would be completely different. Moreover, due to his unfamiliarity with the surrounding environment and weak ability to determine direction, there is no other way. Modern urbanites are not many who can correctly identify direction, and most rely on their phones. Zhang Cheng almost took the wrong path. Fortunately, just as the characters in the game easily arrived at the location of the first act, Zhang Cheng quickly understood why it happened. Because he only needed to observe the surroundings a little and he could see the flags in the distance. Although it looks very small, the fluttering red flag is indeed very eye-catching on this wilderness. There was nothing to say along the way. After eating all the bird eggs and approaching the location of the flag, you can see a small town built on a small mountain, with the flag flying at the highest point. Outside the city, there is a campsite that surrounds the small town in a circular shape. Everything was just as he saw in the game. If you have to say the difference, the game took one of the angles, and now he is truly the first person to view this campsite. Although he hasn't actually arrived yet, he is basically certain in his heart. This is the location of the first act of the Canyon War game, a refugee camp where war refugees gather. Zhang Cheng encouraged himself and told himself to be careful. He has no memory of the original owner and does not know his identity, but as long as he can blend in as an inconspicuous refugee, he will be basically stable. Basically, in this chaotic era, no one would care about the origin of such a refugee. However, just as he finished inflating himself, he accidentally saw a billowing smoke and dust coming from the slanted spike. Before he could figure out what was going on, the figure of a tank had already appeared in the smoke and dust. The kind he had seen on the road before. But on the road, we saw the wreckage of the chariot and the body of the horse, and this time we saw the real horse pulling the chariot and rushing towards us. And, to put it plainly, it's just coming towards him. Because he had studied history, Zhang Cheng had long known that chariots were a weapon that fell behind the times. Due to its various flaws, it was eventually replaced by cavalry. This has led to a general attitude of disdain among people on Earth towards tanks, at least among contemporary Chinese people. But that's theoretical. Only when facing tanks can we understand how bad walking can be for tanks. Armored warhorses drag their chariots, and the wheels roll over, pressing a wild and bloodthirsty atmosphere directly onto people's hearts. If the fear brought by the previous jackals was a form of maladaptation, the confusion of suddenly falling into a war environment in a peaceful environment, making it difficult for you to make the right response, then the fear brought by this tank is a form of power suppression. Standing on the ground, both your instincts and rationality clearly tell you that the other person is overwhelmingly powerful. A line of tanks surrounded Zhang Cheng directly. It's difficult to calculate the number of tanks at the moment, but there are always around 20. Because in a blink of an eye, there were tanks on all sides. Both the front, back, left, and right are chariots, horses pulling them, and the smoke and dust carried by the wheels. Different tanks have subtle differences, or in other words, the horses used to pull the tanks have subtle differences. Most warhorses wear leather vests, but the shape of the vests varies greatly. It can be noticed that a few horses are not armored. But although there are differences in horses, the tank itself and its occupants look surprisingly consistent. All tanks have 3 people. Just like in the history of China, 1 driver and 2 warriors. But unlike the history of China, the person on the right side of the car is dressed in a metal armor, wearing a helmet, holding a long spear, and hanging a bow and arrow on the armrest beside him. The person on the left side of the car, on the other hand, is not wearing armor, does not hold weapons, and has no readily available weapons around him. He is wearing a loose-looking robe. Not to mention anything else, if it's just that outfit, it's more like going on an outing than going to war. The tank closest to Zhang Cheng has come to a complete stop. The car was in front of him, and the person on board was the one wearing a loose robe, looking at him with a constipation-like expression. And, if Zhang Cheng is not mistaken, this person's hair is red, completely different from the others around him. Some people wear helmets and cannot see the color of their hair clearly. But those who didn't wear helmets obviously had the same hair color as Zhang Cheng, or rather Zhang Cheng's current body, all with black straight hair. The people on these tanks all had a bad expression, and the angry expression was even more serious. Obviously, this was not intended to welcome them. "Who are you?" the person asked. This question may seem like a simple ordinary question to others, but when it comes to Zhang Cheng, it immediately becomes an unanswerable question. And he remembers very clearly that when he arrived at the location of the first act, he never made such a sound. At least when entering the refugee camp, there was no investigation or anything like that. So Zhang Cheng had no psychological preparation. This is terrible. However, in a hurry, there was no answer. "Is it the scout of Shenhou?" the other party suddenly asked, with a very clear hostility in their tone. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Kunwu Doctor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. Kunwu Doctor. Strange to say, Zhang Cheng listened to the other person's words with a very strange sense of alienation. It's not like he understands the other person's language, just like how Chinese people treat Chinese or English. On the contrary, there is a feeling of being separated by some kind of translator. You can understand his words, but you happen to know that this is not the language you can understand, and in fact, you don't know why you inexplicably understood it. Of course, this is not the time to pursue such minor matters. More importantly, the tone of the other person's speech. The hostility of the other party is so obvious that you instinctively understand that if you cannot provide a reasonable answer, you may be in danger. But unfortunately, Zhang Cheng really knows nothing about this body. In a moment of desperation, I wanted to speak up, but immediately realized that my casual lies were likely to be easily exposed. What are the consequences of being exposed? Look at these tanks, look at the warriors wearing armor and wielding weapons, and you can probably guess a few points. If the game starts and ends like this, it would really be a shame for the walkers. However, the other party quickly turned their head and looked at another tank in the distance, seeming to hear some sound, and then nodded slightly towards that side. It's like talking to someone invisible. Then, after performing a round of solo performances, he turned around and faced Zhang Cheng again, with a much more relaxed tone this time. "So it's a righteous person," he sighed. "Unfortunately, it didn't work out. But it wasn't your fault." Zhang Cheng was completely confused and didn't know what it meant. But the tone of the other person's words just now clearly showed no signs of hostility. He just passed the level so inexplicably. "This is Dr. Kunwu," explained another person wearing robes on the side of the tank. Of course, Zhang Cheng had no idea what kind of ghost Dr. Kunwu was. There is no such plot in the game. Even in the conversation with NPC, it seems that this was not mentioned. At least the translation and transcoding software couldn't convert this title. Wait. Doctor. In a language environment that he can understand, this is the synonym for ancient Chinese lords. In a relatively simple understanding, there is no such thing as a great marquis or earl, but he is also a small lord who can control a city or a place. During the conversation, the enemy's hostility had already dissipated, and the previous encirclement had noticeably relaxed. I don't know who commanded it, but in any case, the tanks began to withdraw their encirclement and form a new marching formation. "Sure, you can go to the city for a rest," Dr. Kunwu said before leaving. The entire tank team walked forward. The speed of the tanks was very fast, but in a moment, dozens of tanks walked cleanly, leaving Zhang Cheng alone in a daze. The chariots that have long been eliminated by history have become the ancient official title of doctor exclusively for doctors. And there is also the weapon behind oneself that has also been eliminated by history. Gu. If we couldn't be completely certain before, we can now believe it. Combined with these signs, he has traveled through time and space. Have you reached the era of ancient Chinese history? But that's not right. That game is called Dog Rong, and Zhang Cheng is sure he's not mistaken. It's a game full of fantasy elements, that is, swords and magic. So many bodies of jackals and werewolves are not fake. I completely don't understand, they all look alike, but neither do they. But why does the other party call him a righteous man? What exactly happened? Zhang Cheng vaguely felt that this was related to the identity of the original owner. In other words, at the beginning of this game, one can choose their identity. Of course, different identities have different prices, and within the normal game range, the highest option is to choose a doctor's identity. In theory, one can choose to hold the position of emperor or vassal. If it is the emperor, it is probably seeking death because the cost is too high, even difficult to continue the game. However, if you have enough patience and skills, it is possible to choose a vassal status, and of course, a doctor status is not a problem. That is to say, if one chooses to become a doctor, what will happen at this moment? Did you change your body, or did you still have the same body, but your identity changed? Or is it actually that the choice of identity is the same, back and forth? I completely don't understand. After all, time travel is a supernatural thing, and it's really difficult to use logic for deduction. As he spoke, he also walked towards the campsite ahead. As mentioned earlier, in games and in reality are two different things. For example, in a game, the entrance to the campsite is just an entrance, and once you enter, you enter. But the real situation is that there is a pyramid-shaped platform piled up at the entrance of the campsite. Or it can be called skull platform. Of course, it's not human heads on top, but dog heads one by one. Of course, Zhang Cheng doesn't need to ask, but rather the heads of jackals. The blood and flesh on the head were not completely cleaned, so the stench was overwhelming and flies flew wildly. But it has to be said that this thing looks really impressive. Hundreds or even thousands of heads piled together, each grinning, is truly something unimaginable for urbanites on Earth. This is no longer a wilderness, but a human settlement, but the savage and bloody atmosphere still comes from it, making people feel suffocated. It once again reminds Zhang Cheng deeply that this is not a civilized world. To survive in this world, at least one thing is to have the ability to defend oneself. At present, even by the standards of this world, or can be named Canyon World, it is still a period of war. What he can rely on now is nothing else but the foreshadowing given to him by the game of Canyon. However, there was no scene of meeting Dr. Kunwu in the game. In fact, he couldn't understand why there was an extra scene. The only explanation is a matter of time. I arrived here in the game much earlier than my current self. After all, Zhang Chenghua spent a lot of time cleaning up the pile of garbage from the Jackal Man. Although there was an additional piece of wood that I don't know if it was garbage, it probably took an extra hour. In addition, there were multiple stops along the way to examine the remnants of those small battlefields. After all, I had been searching for some spoils of war, and there was a slight deviation in direction, which led to a long detour. Overall, it was about 2 to 3 hours behind the normal situation. That is to say, if he had come 2 hours earlier, he would not have encountered the scene of Dr. Kunwu returning to the city. But because he was 2 or 3 hours late, he happened to meet Dr. Kunwu returning to the city. Zhang Cheng opened his own panel and as expected, he saw an additional task on the taskbar called Dr. Kunwu's Call. The task description is simple. Dr. Kunwu wants to see you, and you should be free to choose whether to see or not, but you can be sure that he won't wait for you for too long. The task reward is a question mark, nothing. However, this task is written in white font, not in the same red font as the Explore and Survive tasks. From this prompt. Indeed, there is a difference between game and reality. And not all tasks are waiting for. In the game, if the player does not complete the task, as long as they do not leave the map of this scene, the task will continue to exist. But if it's in the real world, there must be a time limit to the task. The injured person will not always wait for you to go for treatment, and those who encounter difficulties will also find alternative ways to solve the problem. After much contemplation, Zhang Cheng felt that he should go see Dr. Kunwu. Firstly, the other party has no hostility. Secondly, he is always the Lord here, and it is not a bad thing to establish a good relationship with the Lord if he wants to stay here. Zhang Cheng mustered up courage for himself. Don't be afraid they wanted to kill you, and just now they crushed you with a tank. He walked forward all the way, crossing the skull tower. There is a tank and about 10 infantry soldiers at the entrance of the campsite. The tank was parked in place, but the soldiers on board did not get off, clearly ready to take action at any time. Seeing Zhang Cheng approaching, 2 soldiers holding spears and without armor rushed forward. They should have been greeted, because the 2 soldiers clearly showed no hostility, even carrying their spears loosely on their shoulders. Zhang Cheng noticed that the shapes of these spears were different from what he knew. The spearhead of the spears was particularly long, almost enough for a short sword. "Please follow me," said the leading infantry soldier. Just like before, Zhang Cheng naturally understood this unfamiliar language. It seems that this language was first translated into Chinese and then understood by him. It's like there's an invisible translator on him. Under the guidance of the soldiers, Zhang Cheng walked through the entire camp and into the small town. It's already getting late. At this time, the sun is slanting westward, the light is dim, and there are very few people on the road. As he had expected, the overall structure of the whole camp was exactly the same as in the game of Canyon. But there are also differences. For example, near the door, the old man who will give reputation tasks is no longer there. The old man lost his luggage, which is actually under the broken car not far from him. This is a typical simple task for beginners in this type of game, but they can get 100 experience points and a little camp reputation for free. Don't underestimate this reputation. In the game, with this reputation as the foundation, only other people in the camp are willing to entrust tasks to an outsider like the player. In the game, regardless of whether the task is completed or not, the old man is always by the side of the dilapidated tent, as calm as a mountain in the wind and rain. But in reality, obviously there is no one in that place. The old man doesn't know where he went. Maybe he went to dinner. The real world is different from games. Zhang Cheng was even more convinced of this. That is to say, we need to consider both the difficulty of the task and the timeline. If the timeline passes, the task will either disappear or deform and be replaced with a new task that you completely don't understand. For example, the sudden appearance of a local lord summoning mission this time. He entered the small town and was taken to a place that was considered a temple. Of course, this is by the standards of this world. For Zhang Cheng, who had witnessed various miraculous buildings on Earth, this world's construction technology could no longer have any impact on him. It can only be said that building such a castle in such a backward society is considered good. In the hall, Dr. Kunwu is waiting for him. His clothes were the same as before on the tank, a wide-sleeved robe, without a hat, and his fiery red hair was particularly eye-catching. Moreover, Zhang Cheng was quite nervous before, and it was impossible to delve into it in detail. But this time there was an opportunity to carefully examine. I feel like this hair is really special. There are also many people with red hair on Earth, and photos of such people can be seen everywhere on the internet. But Dr. Kunwu's red hair is completely different, and that color is not ordinary red. To describe it, it seems like a flame is burning, with a special luster flowing in the hair. The closer you look, the more you can feel that this color is extraordinary. Dr. Kunwu coughed lightly, reminding Zhang Cheng that his behavior of staring at the other person was very impolite. Dr. Kunwu first spoke up, "What's your name?" Zhang Cheng hesitated for a moment, but also understood that it was impossible not to mention the name. "My name is Zhang Cheng," he said. Stealing an eye, Dr. Kunwu made no expression, clearly not caring about the name. Or at least, in this world, this name is not considered outrageous. "Are you the only one who escaped?" Dr. Kunwu asked the second question. Zhang Cheng has no idea how to answer. "I can only give a vague, He is a bit regretful now. After all, without the memory of the original owner, there is no way to answer any questions. Can you talk about the final situation?" Dr. Kunwu continued. This time his gaze was fixed on Zhang Cheng. If Zhang Cheng just regretted it a bit earlier, now he is quite regretful. On the task description, it seems that this summons can be refused. That is to say, if you delay for a while and make it through this night, the other party may overlook him. He didn't know how to answer, so he could only hold the other person's gaze. To be honest, the called trembling, unable to sweat, probably refers to this situation. What would happen if it were exposed? This is not a civilized society. When converted to Earth, it is called the Classical Age or the Wilderness Age. Lord or something, even a small lord, killing someone is a common occurrence. Plus, it's a time of war. In fact, looking at the skull platform piled up with the heads of jackals and werewolves at the entrance of the camp, one can understand that killing someone in this place does not require any judicial trial, and there is not even a chance to appeal for justice. As for what would happen if he died? Although he had never died before, he was confident that he had no interest in trying it again. This is not a game, even if you think with your toes, it can never be as simple as reading and saving a disk once. If I had known earlier, I would have taken on an employment task first, at least giving myself a profession and a certain level. Although having a level does not necessarily mean being able to fight against a lord, at least having a chance to escape is not enough. The current state of my body is like a scumbag who doesn't even have a profession. Not to mention resisting, I'm not even qualified to run. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Kunwu Doctor 2. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Kunwu Doctor 2 Dr. Kunwu looked at his trembling expression, but his gaze unexpectedly softened. I'm not blaming you. It's not your fault for not being able to protect the monarch. In that situation. And, after all, you're not a formal vassal and have no obligation to die for the monarch. Moreover, as a person from a remote place, with such awareness and action, you've done very well. Dr. Kunwu stared at him. Would you be willing to become my vassal? By the way, you came from a remote place and may not know me, said Dr. Kunwu. I am a descendant of the Kunwu family, with a bloodline of Zhou Rong. The emperor has 3 nobles, 9 ministers, 20.7 officials, and 80.1 scholars. I am one of the 20.7 officials. My ancestors served as the emperor's officials and were granted the title of Kunwu official in this city, so others call me Kunwu official. This place is also known as Kunwu City. In the game Canyon, this place is clearly called a refugee camp. Well, after all, there is still a slight difference between the game and reality. Zhang Cheng thought to himself in his stomach. What does the other party mean by a vassal? This is not like the history of China, on the contrary, it is more like the neighboring island country of China. Speaking of which, he has played some island country history games to some extent and has some understanding of island country history, so he knows the saying that the island country is a vassal. As for whether there were any retainers in the history of China, he is really not very clear. Why does this world also have the concept of retainers? Also, Zhou Rong. Who is Zhou Rong? Could it be the Zhurong bloodline in my previous bloodline selection? Descendants of gods. Is it really fake? He hesitated for a while without answering, but it wasn't that he didn't want to answer, it was that he couldn't answer. He swore that when he turned around, he would first understand the history of this world, so that he wouldn't say anything now and could only stand there dumbfounded. Watching him hesitate for a while without answering, Dr. Kunwu's gaze softened even more. "I understand," Dr. Kunwu said. "Sure enough, you're not the kind of person who is greedy for security and wealth. Well, rest well in my city tonight. Tomorrow I'm going out on patrol, and if you're willing, you can learn tactics and techniques from the city's garrison. Although I'm not here to conquer the mediocre, teaching you should still be possible." Zhang Cheng had to admit that he couldn't understand at all. This was really the sadness of the traveler. But at least one sentence can be understood, the other person's meaning is. It seems that one can find several people in the city to obtain professions. Dr. Kunwu waved his hand, which was simple and clear, as if it could be used by humans from different worlds. "That's what it means to get rid of you." Zhang Cheng turned around and left. As soon as he left, there was a young maid outside who led him away. But Dr. Kunwu remained still, and after confirming that Zhang Cheng had left, he reached out and drew a symbol in the void. His fingertips seemed to be condensed with a ray of blue light, which condensed like a solid entity, leaving a clear and visible mysterious symbol in the air with his hand. Then, two more people suddenly appeared in the room. If Zhang Cheng were present and saw this scene, he would probably involuntarily say, "Invisible magic ball." This is a level 3 spell in the game that can invisibility a small circle of people around the target. The effect is good, but it requires at least 5 mage levels. However, from Dr. Kunwu's light-hearted movements, it can be seen that this is just a small spell for him, which means his casting level is much higher than level 5. Before Zhang Cheng entered, he used this spell to hide the two people around him. After Zhang Cheng left, he terminated his spell on his own. If Zhang Cheng had the opportunity to carefully examine the entire battle team before, he would probably have recognized these two individuals as members of the previous battle team. Their presence here indicates that they are all close aides and staff of Dr. Kunwu. "What do you think?" Dr. Kunwu asked. "I'm afraid you've encountered a talented person with virtue," said a middle-aged man in his 50s and 60s, who was of average height and had a gray beard hanging from his chest. He gently stroked his beard with his hand. "This son has just been crowned, and he is commendable for his loyalty and bravery. He is also able to protect himself and serve the country. Unfortunately, he is a bit young and lacks strength, otherwise he could entrust important matters. This kid is rude." The other one looked very angry. He is much younger than his peers, around the age of a college student on Earth in his 20s. Surprisingly, he left like this without even returning a gift. Moreover, judging from his fragile appearance, he was carrying a spear on his back. I'm afraid there were more elements of pretending. Poor Zhang Cheng, as a traveler, didn't understand so many different ways in the world. At least he didn't understand that in this era, whether it was to meet or say goodbye, it was necessary to salute, otherwise it would be very impolite behavior. "At this moment, we cannot delve into it," said the grayish beard, dismissive. He has gone through so much in the past few days, with a mix of mental and emotional exhaustion. It's good that he can still do this. Forgetting etiquette is normal. Otherwise, I would feel that his calmness is a bit excessive and he has something to hold on to. Well, that's reasonable. Dr. Kunwu thought for a moment and suddenly changed the topic. How is the situation with the Western Frontier, Doctor? It's too far, and there are scattered soldiers from Canrong blocking the way, said Hua by Beard. It should take several more days. If there are no major accidents, we can expect it to take 30 days. By the time the Western Frontier Doctor arrives, we will have over 100 troops vehicles, which can be considered a battle. Now both the Emperor and the Crown Prince have been killed by the Canine Army, Dr. Kunwu said anxiously. The various officials are all fighting on their own, and I am worried about the Huai on the other side of the swamp. If Canrong and Huai join forces, they may pass through the day's area, avoid my patrol, and go around to our rear. In this way, the rear of Kunwu city is unstable, and there is danger. Then, while Canrong has not yet formed an alliance with the Huai barbarians, concentrate your efforts to eliminate those Huai barbarians. No one can say for sure when the canyon will launch a massive attack. And the tanks cannot be deployed in the swamp. 3 people remained silent together. It's not difficult to eliminate the Huai, but at this point in time. Not to mention casualties, even if elite main forces come out together and fight without any worries, at least it will take a lot of time to defeat their main forces. It will take dozens of days to eliminate its remnants. I only hate that I overlooked those small Huai before, thinking they were difficult to deal with. By the way, isn't that the newly arrived Zhang Cheng? The younger one's eyes suddenly lit up. It is said that he is a student of Pyong. Will he have some skills to some extent? He encountered a major change shortly after coming to Pyong. How many skills did he learn? Didn't you see that he was still carrying a spear? Isn't he also a wanderer? He has always learned from his family since childhood. Besides, if he doesn't have real skills now, what's the use? The young man gloated. We can't give him 3 or 5 years to learn slowly, can we? Anyway, Dr. Kunwu replied. Let him rest for a few days, regain his vitality, and nourish his spirit. Then let him be responsible for eliminating the Huai in the swamp. If he can succeed. He didn't speak, but the other 2 understood the underlying meaning. Whitebeard nodded silently, while the young man's face flashed with a hint of anger. However, the vigilance against Canrong cannot be relaxed at all, he quickly added. Well, let Zhang Cheng take his disciples and give it a try. Of course, he didn't take it seriously in his heart. Although there are not many Huai people in days, there are also thousands. If only those apprentices could handle it, how could it be delayed until now? Although I don't know what abilities Zhang Cheng has, how many abilities can he have at his age? Of course, Zhang Cheng was unaware of the debate over there, let alone the fact that his fate had already been predetermined. He was taken to a small room by the obedient maid. The room is not small, but the windows are very small. The furniture inside is rudimentary and there are no tables or chairs. Well, at least one bed. Although the bed is very short, only about knee-high, considering the railings around the bed, it doesn't seem like a big deal anymore. On the bed, there is being pulled up and a mat. It's not a common bamboo mat in the city, but a relatively rare grass mat. In addition, there is a relatively small desk placed at the end of the bed. Zhang Cheng sat on the bed, feeling nothing else around him. The maid lit a candle for him before leaving. Before leaving, he also asked, do adults want to have dinner? Of course, Zhang Cheng refused. But he increasingly understood that he should have carried a translator with him. Because the other person's address, if translated literally, is definitely not adult, but a strange specialized noun. Of course, it doesn't matter, it's a good thing for him anyway. Although the room is simple, it is very safe. Speaking of which, there seems to be a difference in physical fitness between people from 2 worlds. If Zhang Cheng had worked so hard all day today, it would have been tiring enough to make his feet unable to move, aside from everything else. But for this body-converting fatigue level, it is roughly the degree to which Zhang Cheng, as an urban white-collar worker, walked for an hour outside. But his strength is weak, which can be understood by his physique, and his physique is not too good. In the game of dog roam, 10 points is the average person's value. Understanding this, one can know that Zhang Cheng's character's advantage lies in intelligence and willpower, rather than physical strength. Especially with a 16-point intelligence, it means he has the potential to become a mage. He closed his eyes and summoned the panel again. Strength 9, Agility 10, Physique 12, Willpower 14, Intelligence 16, Charm 10, Luck 8, these attribute values are clear at a glance. The previous state of fatigue has disappeared. After confirming his attributes again, he opened the taskbar. The task, called for Dr. Kunwu, has been displayed as completed and has been transferred from the taskbar to completed tasks. However, the experience slots below have not received any improvement, and they still receive 25 points of experience from killing the jackal. Is it because this task itself does not have experience points? Or is it because you can't gain experience while doing tasks? So, is there a certain difference between reality and gaming? No, this is just a natural thing. Zhang Cheng couldn't imagine you helping Grandpa carry a box to help Grandma cross the road. At most, as a detective solving a mystery and solving a case, you could get experience points, and then use experience points to upgrade yourself to become stronger and more capable of fighting. This setting can only be in the game. If there is such a thing in the real world, it can only be said that this world is all non-material. However, if there are no experience points, what is the reward for this task? Zhang Cheng thought this way while looking at the task description. Then I saw what the reward for the task was. You have become a guest of honor for Dr. Kunwu. It's also an expected reward. But even though I inexplicably became a guest of honor, I still feel very guilty in my heart. To be honest, Zhang Cheng has not yet understood what has happened in this world or what the original owner of this body has experienced. Why was it inexplicably taken away by him? And if you're taken away, then you're taken away. How come you haven't even left any memory? It's difficult for me to handle your sudden disappearance. Anyway, first find a way to understand the situation tomorrow, and then, no matter what, get yourself a combat profession. No profession relies solely on the natural combat power provided by a mere 9 and agility of 10. Not to mention combat, it's not even enough to escape. Then he realized that he had made a wrong choice before. Yes, he should have ordered something to eat. After all, I've been walking all day, and just a few bird eggs are really not enough. Sleeping hungry is really uncomfortable. Fortunately, my body was also very tired and I quickly fell asleep. In a daze, he returned to his computer and opened the game Canyon. In the center of the starting interface, which was supposed to be the location of a row of unrecognizable garbled characters, there were 2 large Chinese characters hanging upright at the end. Canrong. This is a wonderful state, as if the soul and body are separated, and I am using a soul state to watch my body operate the computer. He watched as he chose the new game, and as soon as the screen changed, he directly entered the character generation interface. Canyon is not a very trendy and popular 3D mode, on the contrary, it is a game that places more emphasis on the plot. Throughout the game, players control the character's actions from a third perspective that is high and above them. So, if you pinch your face or something like that, it will be skipped by default. Anyway, it's just a matter of selecting a color, and the screen doesn't look much different. Next, we entered the initial character attribute interface, where the game characters have 7 major attributes. Strength, agility, physique, willpower, intelligence, charm, and luck. This aspect is the same as most RPG games. The difference is that the attributes in Canrong are fixed and random, which means there is no chance for you to arbitrarily increase or decrease attribute points. Perhaps the game developers want to increase the difficulty in this way, but this method is meaningless. The attributes are random, so just a few more brushes can get the desired attributes, which is not as good as the classic fixed point addition and subtraction. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Dream of Retrospection. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10 Dream of Retrospection. Strength 9, Agility 10, Constitution 12, Willpower 14, Intelligence 16, Charm 10, Luck 8, these are the attributes that Zhang Cheng randomly acquired this time. Objectively speaking, these attributes are not particularly good, but they are also not particularly bad. After all, as a player who has completed multiple levels, Zhang Cheng is very confident that although this starting attribute has an impact, it is not the key and does not affect the game process. There is no setting for attribute points to be upgraded in the game, but there are tasks that can increase attributes. The highest attribute of this initial character is intelligence, suitable for being a spellcaster, and the lowest attribute is luck. But even if Zhang Cheng passes the level multiple times, he still doesn't understand the purpose of luck. Then I entered the character setting interface, which will provide basic settings for the character. To be honest, when I was playing games to create characters before, there were too many garbled characters in this area, and most of the options were incomprehensible, so I could only guess or ignore them. But this time, the intelligent translation software took a break and actually translated all these garbled words. It's hard to say whether the translation was correct or not, but at least it became understandable. And in this setting interface, there is finally room for players to choose, as they have 10 initial points that can be used to purchase various settings for their characters. Each setting has a different point price, and there are even inverted stickers. The first one is identity selection, with a total of 9 identities, namely the Emperor, Feudal Lords, Officials, Sergeants, Corporal, Wanderers, Commoners, and Slaves. For Zhang Cheng, who is a Chinese and has some understanding of history, it is clear at a glance. When the mouse is placed on a certain identity, a series of instructions will pop up. Zhang Cheng casually placed it on the first one, which is the Emperor. The right side directly provides an explanation of this identity. You are the supreme ruler of this world's ordinary creatures, or at least you have the corresponding right to claim. You have no friends, only enemies and subordinates. You are so important and esteemed that even your enemies must show due respect for your identity. No one will resist your reasonable demands. You have the right to hold any sacrifice, and even the gods will patiently listen to your demands. Of course, for your enemies, killing you at all costs may be the best choice. From this explanation, it can be seen that this identity should have the ability to unlock all dialogue options. At that time, he did consider choosing this identity. Unfortunately, the two identities of the Emperor and the Feudal Lords are both gray and cannot be selected, as choosing these two identities requires more than 10 points. Not to mention these two, the status of a doctor is worth 10 points. That is to say, after choosing this identity, there is no need to think too much about other options. The number of points required for the other identity options naturally decreases. By the way, the commoner identity requires points to be 0, while the slave identity option is even better, with a direct value of 0.3. In other words, if you choose slave identity, the points will not decrease, but instead increase, directly from 10 to 13. Of course, the explanation for slaves is also very explicit. You were born lowly and insignificant, without even the most basic freedom, and can only rely on your master to survive. No one will respect you, and don't expect you to have any basic rights. Being called around by others is the norm in your daily life. Both hostile and local factions will ignore you. Baits, abandoned soldiers, cannon fodder, these are the values that everyone sees in you, but of course, this is not entirely bad. Enemies may be too lazy to pursue you and strike your final fatal blow. Previously, Zhang Cheng had chosen to pass the slave level, and the conclusion was that this choice was very bad, with great restrictions and limited options. Moreover, the most unfortunate thing was that there were very few opportunities to improve his identity in the game, and it was a type that he didn't even know how to miss out on. Based on experience, the most cost-effective among these identities should be the third to last, Traveler. Value 2 points, but can unlock the vast majority of conversation options. It is also easier to improve one's identity. The second one is Bloodline. It is also a series of options. For example, the first Bloodline has a very high value of 20 points, and under normal circumstances, gray is not an option. But choosing this Bloodline immediately has all attributes +2, and commoners and slaves cannot choose this Bloodline. In the past, I couldn't understand the garbled code, but now I can understand what this is all about. Haotian Bloodline. You carry the noble blood of Haotian, or at least prove that one of your ancestors was a priest of Haotian. Whether of the same kind or of a different race, you are highly respected and all kinds of rights can be fully reflected, because no one dares to take the risk of angering the heavens. Even if unfortunately you become a prisoner, your enemies will take care of you carefully, because you are the most valuable part of the spoils of war. No deity can refuse such a noble sacrifice. Haotian's bloodline is good, but it's too expensive. 20 o'clock, the cost is too high. The following series of divine bloodlines, including Zhurong bloodline, Nuwa bloodline, Dongjun bloodline, Shiha bloodline, Yunzhongjian bloodline, Qinyao Yunu bloodline, Jumong bloodline, Sheasiming bloodline, and so on, are essentially all the same. It is the bloodline of a certain deity, with a full attribute of +1 or +2, which receives a favorable bonus in the group of deity believers. If you choose a suitable profession, there is still a profession bonus. All these divine bloodlines are worth 12 points. Then there are a bunch of secondary divine bloodlines, such as mountain ghosts, Qishui women, drought dragons, Ing dragons, Xian willows, etc. There are many, so I won't look at them one by one. The benefit is full attribute +1, and the cost is that the profession is restricted. If there are several full attributes +2, in addition to the profession restriction, there is also a cost of general goodwill impairment. All these secondary divine bloodlines are worth 8 points. Of course, these divine names are very strange, they are simply characters from Chinese mythology. However, at that time, Zhang Cheng really felt that this was just a result of the translation software's whim, and he drew ancient Chinese mythological terms from the vocabulary to translate. Below is a pile of exotic bloodlines. The benefit is that certain attributes are added value, while the cost is that certain attributes are reduced in value. However, the overall total number of attributes remains basically unchanged, and even if there is an addition, 1 or 2 points are added, which is completely insignificant compared to significant bonuses such as +1 +2 for all attributes. What does Bifang say about the bloodline of the tiger, the bloodline of the Yan Emperor, and the bloodline of the 9 barbarians? All these exotic bloodlines are worth 2 points. The worst thing is being bloodless. The explanation clearly states that you are an ordinary member of your tribe, and even if you have any bloodline, it is already worthless. Value points are 0. The third one is talent and expertise. This is also influenced by other options. For example, a few basic specialties such as common language mastery, multilingual mastery, and writing mastery, are worth 2 points each if a commoner or slave was chosen earlier, and 1 point each if they are above the status of a wanderer. And these few specialties cannot be ignored. If you don't choose this specialty, the cost will be huge. Without common language mastery, over 90% of NPCs in this game will not be able to communicate with you. Without multi-language mastery, many NPCs with critical tasks will be unable to communicate with you. Without text mastery, you will also be missing a large portion of tasks. Other tasks related to letters cannot be opened. Of course, there are also some bonus points in talents and specialties, yes, bonus points rather than spending points. Previously, Zhang Cheng knew that the Haotian bloodline required 20 points, which was achieved by adding points here. Just need 1 foot disability to get 2 points, choose 1 hand disability to get 1 point, 1 ugly adds 1 point, 1 weak adds 1 point, 1 plagued by various illnesses adds 3 points, and 1 mentally deranged adds 2 points, 1 difficult to heal injury plus 1 point, and 1 severe epilepsy plus 1 point. In short, if all these talents and specialties with added points were selected, they would probably be enough for Zhang Cheng to choose a emperor identity. Of course, with so many negative debuffs added, it's unlikely that the emperor will have much use left. He will have to wait there to die from the beginning of the game. In short, like the vast majority of such games, the starting choice is to use good steel on the blade, not only based on quality, but also on price. Cost performance is the right pursuit for players. After all, Zhang Cheng only planned to complete the level and write a guide this time, without intending to challenge his limits. So in terms of identity, I directly chose Traveler, and in my bloodline, I chose No Bloodline. Hey, although the divine bloodline is good, unfortunately the points are really too few to afford. Among the talents and specialties, I listed 3 basic abilities that must be possessed for tasks. Common Language Mastery, Multilingual Mastery, and Text Mastery, and the remaining points were only enough to choose within a limited range of choices. There are only 3 options that can be included in the list: Quick Feet, which is a talent that allows characters to run exceptionally fast and escape danger. Rebirth is a talent that restores some health every once in a while, greatly enhancing sustained combat ability and reducing the consumption of healing drugs. Erudition, expertise, the ability to correctly identify the purpose of an item and estimate its price. It is essential to avoid being bullied by unscrupulous merchants. Of course, for players like Zhang Cheng who have already passed the level, the difference in choices is not really significant. However, considering that it's the last time I've played this game, it's still better to regenerate, enhance sustained combat ability, and reduce game time. Then, Zhang Cheng chose the next step. The monitor turned pitch black, indicating that the game was about to begin. Zhang Cheng felt a vague feeling in his mind that something was not right, but he couldn't explain exactly what was wrong. Half loud, suddenly startled. Wait, I haven't entered my name yet. Yes, after creating a character, the final step is to enter the character's name. This is a necessary rule for creating characters of all kinds. How can a game be played without a name? Why did the game start before the name was entered this time? But for some reason, even though I realized something was wrong, my mind was in a daze. I feel as if my body is falling from the void, feeling a vague and indescribable discomfort. A strange voice inexplicably appeared, followed by a thud that shook the soul. Zhang Qingmeng opened his eyes and then realized that it was just a dream. He was awakened just now by a knock on the door. He vaguely wanted to get out of bed, put on slippers, and open the door, while casually turning on the light. But such a simple task is difficult to accomplish because no matter how hard you search, you can't find the slippers. Not only that, my hand couldn't find the switch, but instead inexplicably caught an unfamiliar object. This stimulus made others shudder, and it was only then that he realized where he really was. He is not in the room he rented, and there are no slippers or lights here. This is an unknown world. A ray of sunshine shone in from outside the small window, reminding him that the world also has days and nights. I just don't know if there are also cosmic stars here. But this redundant idea was immediately thrown by Zhang Cheng to the country of Java. The crisis of life and death has not been resolved yet, so there is no time to care about the natural sciences of this world. He put on his clothes. He slept naked last night, there was no way he could do it. There is clearly no such thing as underwear in this world, otherwise it wouldn't have been windy and cold all day yesterday, and when he opened the door, he saw the maid who brought him last night. She brought breakfast and toiletries, along with a new pair of shoes. The technological development in this world clearly does not support things like toothbrushes and toothpaste, only providing simple mouthwash saline. As for breakfast, the staple food is a kind of congee which is not made of rice or millet grains, a pot of vegetable soup, and a small fish. It doesn't taste good, but it's not too bad either. In addition, the maid reminded me of dinner time. Yes, dinner time, there is no lunch. The people here only eat 2 meals a day. Well, Zhang Cheng tried hard to tell himself to do as the Romans do when in Rome. After a brief inquiry about Dr. Kunwu's movements, the maid's answer was that Dr. Kunwu had left the refugee camp early in the morning, but he had already been ordered to allow Zhang Cheng to move freely here. And this room is also reserved for him to stay for a long time. So, Dr. Kunwu's distinguished guests is indeed a good start. But the problem is equally urgent. Firstly, it is necessary to find a profession for oneself. If it's a game, there's no need to think too much, just focus on the mage profession. After all, the various data of this body are presented here. The most suitable profession is a mage, followed by a pastor, but in the real world, the situation is completely different. For no other reason, just think with your brain and you will know that although the mage is strong, he is crispy. Even for highly skilled mages, crispy skin cannot be changed. If a melee profession accidentally gets close, and there is no protective spell or the protective spell fails to take effect, a lucky critical strike is a flash kill. In addition, spell professions were too weak in the early stages. A first-level warrior can easily single out 3 monsters, while a first-level mage can barely deal with 1. Even if it's tough in the future, at least in the early stages, we need to be able to get by first. It doesn't matter in the game, I accidentally hung up and read the disc again. But the real world clearly cannot have a sense of luck. End of this chapter.